Good evening and welcome to the Development Review Commission on September 26th. The Development Review Commission is created to hold public meetings and hearings to provide analysis and recommendations to the City Council regarding general land use policies and applications where the Commission has the power to recommend and to render final decisions on specified applications. The Commission has final decision-making power, including but not limited to all aspects of proposed and future development. Development Review Commission recognizes the creation of a desirable environment throughout the city for residents, business, and industry is a prime requisite for the interdependence of land values, aesthetics, and good site planning by promoting harmonious, safe, attractive, compatible development that's therefore considered to be in the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. I'd like to introduce the members of the Commission with us tonight. To my left is Andrew Johnson, Phil Amorosi, Scott Sumners. I'm Sherilyn DeSpears. To my right is Nick Labate, Mike DiDomenico, and Tom Brown. From staff, we have Cynthia Jarrett, Diana Kaminsky, and Suparna Dasgupta. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from September 12th, both regular and study session. Someone like to make a motion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the study session and the regular hearing minutes from September 12th.
Second? Second. It's been moved by Commissioner Amorosi and seconded by Commissioner Johnson. All those in favor? And that passes for nothing with the commissioners present voting. Our first agenda item is PL 170255. Staff would like to make an introduction.
Good evening, Commission. Before you is Lot 4 BTS. It's an office building that's proposed for Rio Salado 2100. Whoops. How do I go to? Whoop, there we go. Okay. It's part of a larger development. In your packet, I provided a phasing plan. I believe this is phase 9. It's north of the hotels that are already constructed and east of Tempe Marketplace. They came in previously for the PAD, which established the development standards for the site, and they're before you for the development plan review for the site plan, landscape plan, and elevations. This is the phasing plan that shows we're on phase 9 of 10. So additional commercial office and a possible hotel or future office. They're not necessarily being done in the order of phasing that's shown here. These are the development standards that they're working within. Their parking is about 64 spaces. They need 217, so they're slightly over the required parking. It is a surface parked lot. This is the site plan. All of the parking is on the west side of the building. They've provided additional landscaping, and they're doing some covered parking for additional shade for the tenants. This shows the landscape plan. They do have a specific tenant that they're working with, and they're doing an amenity area on the south side of the building specific to their tenants' needs. That's the area that you see kind of the circular pattern with some artificial turf. One of the issues, because this is on a landfill, they have restrictions on the amount of water-intensive landscape that they can use. So this is a condition where staff is supportive of using artificial turf within a development. It's a 2-story office building. And these are the elevations. We've not received any calls of inquiry or concern regarding the project. The applicant's seen the conditions of approval and is in agreement with staff. And I'll defer to the applicant to go over the design details with you.
Any questions of staff at this time by the Commission? Seeing none, we'll ask the applicant to give a brief presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Todd Lawrence with Butler Design Group. We're the architects for the project, representing Boyer Companies, the developer. Boyer recently completed, within the last year, Building A, which is directly across the street from this proposed development. Boyer is very excited to have a tenant in line for this, Benchmark Electronics. They are on a somewhat of a fast-track schedule to get moved in here and to consolidate their offices that they have elsewhere in this city and in Scottsdale. The building itself is a rather straightforward two-story, for us, shell office building. All tenant improvements will be coming at a later date by a different firm. The building itself is composed of tilt panel concrete construction, steel frame within. We have portions of steel and glass along the facades. The palette is primarily based on what was used at Building A across the street. So we have a lot of the same elements and forms. A lot of the same materials are used. We're introducing some new ones to make this building stand out by itself. The rest of the site, as mentioned, is primarily parking with the amenity area to the south. We'll be utilizing the existing access points that are already established. On the north side, I think we are creating a new one, which will be in line with the Freedom development across the way. Aside from that, the tenant is looking at doing solar car canopies, and the rest of the development is more or less just straightforward, meeting with staff, adding out landscaping, try to increase some of our shading components and things like that for the site. And primarily, that's it.
Questions for the applicant? Anyone? Commissioner Brown?
I have just a few general questions. I understand the site was recompacted with
Yeah, this is part of the greater domestic landfill area that had been under remediation for several years. Deep dynamic compaction occurred in these areas. No further additional compaction is going to occur. They are going to go through the process of scarifying and meeting the geotechnical requirements that are required by Hogan Associates, who's overseeing all of the development of Tempe or the Rio 2100.
I mean, I have some curiosity issues, but I'll just talk to a soils engineer about how that's typically done. Not having done it myself, I recently attended a seminar on problems with geotechnical, and I'm sure that with this investment, that it's been done properly. The only other comment I had is that the building plate's pretty wide, so a lot of the interior space is some distance from glass, and I just learned that you're not doing the TI, so perhaps there's nothing to be said beyond that, except that it's a challenge. And you mentioned briefly the tenant. Could you? I didn't quite catch it. Who the tenant will be?
Tenant is Benchmark Electronics. As their office headquarters, not a manufacturing or anything like that. This is purely for office use.
Okay. At a glance, the building looks normally proportioned, and you realize how big it is and how deep it is. There actually is quite a space there. In some countries, you couldn't build. It would be a code violation to have interior office space that far, but for all I know, that's the storage and conference rooms and that sort of thing. So I guess that question really doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, the tenant improvements will have to display that they meet all the requirements of the code. This floor plate footprint is actually smaller than what was done Building A across the street, just for reference.
That's the extent of my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? If not, this is a public hearing. If you want to sit down, and then you'll have a chance to come up. It is a public hearing. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this, I don't have any cards, so seeing none, we'll close the public portion of the meeting and open it up to commissioner discussion. Comments? If there are no comments, I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve PL 170255.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Commissioner Amorosi and seconded by Commissioner DiDomenico. All those in favor? Opposed? And that passes 7-0. Thank you. Our next item is PL 170238 Weston Tempe.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I'm going to take just 2 seconds to load up the applicant's presentation before Diana goes into the presentation.
Okay. As a reminder to those of you in the audience, if you wish to speak in the public hearing portion, please turn in a white card to staff.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, Diana Kaminsky, Senior Planner, City of Tempe. The Weston project is proposing an amendment to an existing planned area development. It's a mid-block project containing 4 properties between Mill Avenue and Myrtle on the south side of 7th Street. It's adjacent to alleys on both its west and southern boundaries, and there are 2 existing structures on site today. The blue outline that you see on the overlay of the previous PAD is to show you the relationship of where the new proposed hotel would go in relation to the former hotel, which was actually located closer to Mill Avenue. There are now 2 other projects that would be coming in to the west and east of this, so this would be flanked by other developments. They are proposing some modifications to the planned area development standards, including an increase to lot coverage. I need to note that because the report said decrease from 81 to 85%. And a decrease in landscape area on the ground floor, although the original PAD included the upper floors as part of their landscape allotment. And we looked at the comparison of just the first floor landscape area. This shows you the site context. The hotel has a couple different layers, the first 2 floors, and then it steps back to more of a thin tower-like element. And you'll see that in some of the site plan or the floor plates. This is the site plan. All of the service entry comes off of the southwest corner of the property, off of the alleys. And they've worked very closely with staff in trying to activate the alleys so they aren't back of house in terms of the aesthetics and the form that they've taken. All of the entry for guests is off of the north side with additional parking on the street front. The access would be one way in from the western drive, circulating on site to a drop-off lay-by area where they have valet access, and then exiting to go into the garage, which goes below grade. The basement level is 2 floors, subterranean. The lower level is actually a half level that could be expanded if they chose to, but they're meeting the parking requirements for the downtown standards. The first floor is shown there on the right-hand side as the full footprint underneath the building. Here's the first floor again. I'm not going to go through the programming of each floor. I'll leave that to the applicant, but wanted to show just a relationship of the setbacks. They did push the building back on the west side to enable some additional landscape area on the west, as well as on the south side. It is a 6-inch setback, but the first floor is set back 2 feet to allow planter beds on the first floor that allows some vines to grow up on the south elevation of the building. They're doing a 0 lot line on the east side, and then they're doing 0 lot line on the north with some arcade fins that extend out over the lay-by area. There is a small rooftop landscape element on the southwestern corner that's viewed from the top, and as you go up the building elevations, you'll see more rooftop expression, and then the building itself becomes a narrow fin to the north orientation of the site. Floors 4 through 16 are standard rooms, and then the amenity deck is on the 18th floor. The landscape plan is proposing a evergreen elm and orchid tree along the street front, and they've got a variety of succulents and vines that would take the heat on the west and south sides to enhance the elevations along the alleys. These are the upper deck landscape areas and the amenity deck and the 3rd floor. These are some close-ups of the elevations of the east and west side of the building. I'll defer to the applicant to present the materials and the design intent. These are the south and north elevations. The south side has the window configurations aligned with the interior rooms, but you'll notice they're offset, so it's not a standard grid pattern, and it's not a typographical error in the drawings. That is the way they intend them to be. And then they're predominantly doing glazing on the north face. Some renderings and 3-dimensional modeling of the site. And then I wanted to go over a few conditions of approval that are a little out of the ordinary. And the first one is a proposed change I'd like to read into the record that we discussed at pre-session. And this is in regards to condition 4 for the timing of the demolition permit. This would be changed to read, "A demolition permit may not be issued for any existing structures on the site until one of the following occurs. 1, a mass excavation permit is issued that includes a shoring and excavation of the basement level. Or 2, a phased foundation permit is issued. Or 3, a complete building permit submittal is accepted by the Community Development Department." And this has to do with the timing of their phases for construction and the existing structures that are on site. The other conditions, number 9 is related to the east side driveway configuration as they showed it on the plan. It contemplates the adjacent property to the east having a setback for their building. Since we don't know if that is going to occur, we wanted to maintain safe egress from this property on site with a site visibility triangle. There was a drawing within the report condition that demonstrates how that can be done without affecting the floor plate of their building, providing safe egress to 7th Street from their garage when you're ramping up to a sidewalk condition. So that's what condition 9 is about. Condition 15 is regarding the materials on the north entry arcade. You'll notice the fins on the lower left side are kind of a copper color. We didn't receive the materials until fairly late in the submittal process, so there was an assumption that this was a metallic finish on the paint for the metal fins. Later they came back and they were presented as more of a beige, nondescript color. So trying to tie in with the character of the downtown and the brick colors and some of the copper colors, staff conditioned that the material on those fins reflect what you see in the image to the left, that it be a copper, not necessarily a copper metal, but a paint that has a reflectivity in it with like a mica pigment. Number 15 is that was the same condition. The materials on the southwest tower, which is the rust-colored element that you see in the middle rendering, the proposed material on the upper floors is all stucco. Where you don't see glazing is ephes. And our concern was that most of the buildings along Mill Avenue have masonry, predominantly brick. We had agreed early on in the process that brick wasn't necessary, but that they needed to have an alternative material that was reflective of the colors and the texture and the value of Mill Avenue. We didn't see that in what was finally presented, so we like the color, we like the image, but not the material. So we're requiring that they go back and use any one of a variety of materials, such as a metal panel system, stone panel system, something other than ephes for that portion of the building that you see that's rust on the southwest corner. And lastly, number 16 was regarding the spandrel glazing on the northeast corner, and that had to do again with the adjacency of the unknown design of the building to the east. So if the building to the east is set back, then this corner would be exposed, and we would wish that it retained the design element as they presented. If the building to the east is a zero lot line configuration that would block this, then we're okay with this being eliminated through their building permit process. The applicant has received the conditions of approval, and I believe with the changes that we're presenting here, they're okay with those conditions. I think they may want to discuss the stucco condition.
Questions for staff? Anyone? Brown?
The rendering in the lower left is the one you prefer, and the next one is the one that the final design application
Yes.
contained. When you say we like this color, is this really just one person's opinion? Or is there?
No, it is the project that I reviewed, but we do review it through all of the planning group. And again, we were not given the materials either on the elevations or in sample form till late in the process. So in looking at the beautiful renderings that were submitted initially, there was an assumption of the material being a metallic finish. When we finally got the materials and realized that it was a flat matte paint finish similar to what you'd see on a utility box, just a plain color that didn't have any reflectivity or play with light, there was concern, but it is color is subjective.
In both cases, it's metal?
Yes, metal panel.
Okay, now the rendering in the middle is, I believe, where they're talking about a rust-colored ephes, and you were hoping at one point for it to be masonry or some upgrade?
Yes.
But there will be a building, I'm sure, of at least 2 stories, maybe more, between Mill Avenue and this face, correct?
You see there, the gray shadow is the massing of what was presented in a preliminary site plan review for a 2-story building along Mill Avenue. We do have a step back on Mill Avenue, so it goes down 50 feet at the street front. So with the depth of that lot, I'm not sure how much taller it could get than 50 feet. So this would be visible from the
I
street.
guess my point is when you're walking on Mill Avenue, you probably won't be able to see very much other than the top 5 or 10 stories of this 20-story building.
But you will see it from other buildings along Mill Avenue. Yes.
Okay.
And it would be the only building that we have like this, of this size and caliber, with a stucco tower.
Thank you.
I want to understand the wings. That is a metal product, but it's being painted a flat paint?
Well, it's just, yeah, I've got the sample words here.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, applicant can now make a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Darren Sender, Sender Associates, Tempe, Arizona. Here representing Kai Investments, LLC. They are the ultimate developer of this property along with the Weston brand. And we're very excited to be here. We know that this property has kind of bounced around a lot of ideas since Long Wongs went away, and we've seen quite a few different products for this. And we're really happy to see a very similar type of development coming back with this project, as was approved around 2005 or 6 with the M3 or M7 project, actually. So there was also, like Diane had mentioned, there's also Core Development owns properties on both sides, and they are talking with staff. They've come in for site planning review on a multifamily project to the east of us, and we've been in very close contact with them about how to coordinate that, make sure that there's no interruptions between those two, making sure that they can develop what they want, we can develop what we want. And those discussions are continuing. We've got a phone call coming up hopefully the next week. And so we're working closely with that. And I think ultimately we're going to see a cohesive development of this north half of the block, ultimately. Let's see here. You all are aware of this property. It's in the heart of downtown, just off of Mill Avenue, so it's not on Mill Avenue. It's in the center of the block. 7th Street to the north, and as Diana had mentioned, Myrtle to the east. We're right in the middle. 2 alleys adjoin our property once to the west. It goes all the way from 7th Street all the way down to University. And there's another alley that only goes partially through the block. It goes from our southwest corner, and it goes all the way east to Myrtle, so it doesn't go all the way to Mill. Kind of a unique site in that respect. So we've got some really neat opportunities that the architects took advantage of, along with suggestions from Diana. A little bit of close-up here, a little more context. Obviously, there's some projects happening. The Opus project to the east. Let me go back here. Got the Opus project to the east, and then obviously off the map to the west, under construction, is the Whole Foods project, and we've got some other projects along Mill Avenue that we saw tonight, and we saw in some other projects that are approved as well down the street that hopefully will be coming into at this point. A little more closer context there. This is, in case you're wondering, this is a site with a basketball court on it. So in case you've seen that, there's a large temporary basketball court on there. Very, very quickly, Diana does such a great job presenting the basics and the main part of the project. I'll just quickly go through. The site is zoned CCPAD. It's been that way for quite a while. I think the M7 project zoned at CC. It is a mixed-use general plan with the high-density urban core density on the property. It is within the urban center on the concept study for the downtown building heights, which allows 300 feet. We're not going anywhere near 300 feet. The original approvals for M7, you probably saw in your staff reports, were, I think, 307 or something like that, 307 feet. I think our top tip of the building is at 224, and that's not the deck. That's actually some roof structures that we have, shade structures on the roof. So the actual building height is significantly less than that. And I will let the majority of this presentation be by the person who knows the most, and the architect from RSP, Joe Ellis.
Hi, I'm Joe Ellis with RSP Architects. I just wanted to first, in this first slide, to introduce Weston. As we look at this project and we say, okay, who are the clients, if you will, that kind of mold and shape this design? It is our client. It is also the city of Tempe, and it is also Weston as a brand. If you look at some of the images there are some unique aspects of Weston as a brand. They see themselves as a distinctive hotel. Each hotel is different. They brand themselves by thinking of themselves as a contemporary or modern design, and they also bring into the mix something that they call biophilic design, and that is to try to take the design and bring it, some aspect of the design into nature. You can see in the upper left-hand corner that might be a little more literal interpretation of that. In the lower right-hand corner, this is the Westin Hotel in Hamburg, in which they played with patterns that start to develop that. As a brand, they're considered a 4-star property, although hotelers don't speak so much these days in terms of stars anymore. It is a lifestyle property. So the history of Westin goes back to 1930 in Seattle. It was then acquired in the late 80s by Starwood Hotels and Resorts. And then Marriott, most recently in the last year, acquired Starwood. So Marriott has 32 brands, but very exclusively, they only have a couple brands in which they put into what they call their lifestyle collection. And Westin is part of that lifestyle collection. So there's a very unique connection between how they see their brand and their customer. And in a Westin, it is tied to wellness. And it is about eating well, sleeping well, drinking well, playing well, as they say. And it plays to an audience in which they call the achiever. So I think there's a very good mesh here between that brand that's being brought to Tempe and the city of Tempe with its youth and ASU and what it's about. I won't dwell on this too much. It seems as if all of us have introduced the project in terms of its location. But there are some planning aspects that from day one we wanted to try to achieve with this property on its site. One of which was we weren't quite on Mill Avenue, but we were certainly visible from Mill Avenue. So we wanted to create some sort of activity that, that created a visual connection and a draw to Mill Avenue. So you see this outdoor dining area up here, and this became a very small 1,800 square foot lease retail space on the corner that would work in conjunction with the hotel. It was important for us to have a 7th Street address to the hotel, so that's where our drop-off is. The parking entrance was located directly across from the Brickyard's parking entrance, and the reason for that is we see that as an opportunity of shared parking back and forth. So the ease of dropping somebody off coming across, if you're not by valet down into our parking structure, you're directly across the street into the Brickyard parking structure and come across. Our loading works off of the corner of the 2 alleyways on the south and west, so that trucks can either come in from 7th Street and back up, or come in from Myrtle and back up there. As I mentioned before, this is directly out of Weston's design foundation book, as they put it. And the way that they see that design of a hotel should come together is to take what they feel is a contemporary and modern aesthetic, form that with biophilic principles of tying to nature. One of their requirements is that on the interior of every Westin hotel, there will be a green wall. They also encourage patterns that are tied back to nature. And then take the context from which the hotel sits and meld that together, and that is sort of their soup of recipe for design. So given that, there's a couple of things that we tried to achieve in the design, and I think we did. The building is composed of a two-story podium that's at 45 feet, a first floor of 20 feet, and a second floor of 25 feet, and then a tower. And we have taken the tower and broken the mast down into three interlocking components. So in this rendering, what you're seeing is what we feel is a more distinctive signature aspect of Westin, with this glass curtain wall as their front door, if you will, from 7th Street. And then an interlocking component of this tower, which is the reddish color piece that ties back to the coloration of brick masonry, and it faces Mill Avenue. You also see at the top of the tower a fabric stretched on steel frame canvas awning that is a shade to a outdoor function space and pool at the top of the building. The tower is broken down in scale and notched on this east side, and that was purposely done to try to open it up and make it as inviting from the corner of 7th and Mill as possible. This is a view from the east side looking west, and here you're starting to see the third component of those three interlocking pieces, the white piece in the back that ties back around, scales broken down, treats the curtain wall piece as more of a thin package and gives the tower a vertical element to it. At the ground level here, you're seeing three major conference spaces that are in the front. They're actually meeting rooms, about 750 square feet each. And as Diana mentioned, the glass that faces the property to the east, at this point that's considered spandrel glass. If the property next door moves fast enough, we will change the drawings to make that essentially a blank concrete block wall. On the south side of the tower, we've taken this opportunity to weave within the design some of this biophilic philosophy, if you will. We've taken each room, and essentially on the south side, in terms of solar gain, we only want a single window. There's about I think 6 rooms across there. So we've stacked the passenger elevators and the service elevators and the housekeeping all on the south side, and we have this package of about 6 rooms in the center. And essentially what we're doing here is we're playing with taking a room and dividing it into 3, so at some point 1/3 of that room becomes a window, and there's a play in where those windows are located back and forth to create a more natural pattern. You also see that there is a concrete ledge that is extended over top of each of those windows to accentuate that pattern and put it in shade. We think this would be pretty realistic as the way it's showing, because this is the south side. You'll have a pretty high solar angle at that point. We've also wrapped the podium at the lower level with a series of green walls themselves. Doing this to not only try to capture a microclimate, if you will, between that and the concrete block that the podium is made up of, but also to bring a design element to these alleyways on both sides that starts to create some level of interest as opposed to a blank concrete block wall. Well, the small slot windows that are back there are actually just windows to bring daylight into a service corridor on the second floor where the ballroom is. Just very quickly, going through the materials, the glass is a unistrut curtain wall. The vertical red element, as Diane had mentioned at this point, in our design is an ephes broken down into scored panels, that look like that would look like panels. I'll show you a slide in a minute. We've had discussions with Kitchell Construction's group here called Capture, and Capture's been very successful in fabricating panels up to 30 feet wide that would be hoisted in place and put in place. When you do this, the quality, and I know there's been some concern about the quality of ephes on some of the buildings in Tempe, but when you do this inside of the factory, as opposed to scaffolding all the way up and trying to apply ephes, the quality goes up quite a bit. There's a quality control, and looking at it, you can take it, you can look at it under different lighting conditions and see where the problems are, fix the problems before those panels are hoisted in place. So what you're seeing here, it's a little hard to see on this slide, but essentially there's an accent of concrete block in two different colors. One is a darker color and one is a lighter color. There are two different shades of ephes, one for the vertical reddish piece on the east side and a white ephes, but darkened down enough to meet the standards of the requirements for reflectivity that is on the backside of the property. On the south side, here you're starting to see these panels on the lower side of the podium that would be used for these green walls, and that is a molded fiberglass panel that has open squares of about 1.5 inches. That's applied in front of the concrete block material. This is a shot very quickly of Capture's fabricating plant, say these are panels that are currently being made for the high-rise Hampton Inn that's going to be in downtown Phoenix. Sun Construction very successfully put a series of panels on the Ak-Chin Hotel down in Maricopa. They're just finishing that project up. So it does bring a higher level of quality to the ephes product. Two landscape plans, just quickly to show you. Our landscape architect is here if there's any questions. We worked, I think, diligently with staff to develop this right-of-way area, incorporating the diagonal parking that would match the Opus project, incorporating a lush landscape, and bringing a sidewalk that starts to undulate so that you have a lush green planting on one side, and then you shift on when you go across the driveway to the other side and then back again. We're looking at a pattern on the driveway, again, to pull some patterns of nature back into the project. That would be some sort of a striped pattern, if you will, that would undulate back and forth in a width. Well, let me go back, because that is, what you're seeing is two different things at the same time here on this drawing. You're also seeing the very top level, which is our pool deck and amenities level. So that level will include The pole that you see in the center, the pole would be raised 4 feet above the deck area that's in front of it so that you'd be able to be in the pool and look out to the views. When you come off of the elevators, there'll be a small lounge area to the left, and there's a function space up there, and there will be a bar up there with some limited services. We're not anticipating huge crowds up there in any way, but there will be evening cocktail service and function service for weddings and that sort of thing. I think that's it.
Commissioners, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I just wanted to mention with Diana's stipulation modification comments earlier, we agree with stipulation number 4. It's just a timing issue. Like she had mentioned in the pre-session, you can't actually start constructing without tearing the buildings down. So we talked to Joe at RSP about how you time and how you phase permits. So that is kind of the best option for us at this point, so we don't have to dig around the buildings. The other stipulations we are fine with because they're really talking about coordinating with the project next door. The only one we still have an issue with is what Joe was just talking to you about, the EFS. We feel that the ground floor is where a lot of the pedestrian feeling is on these materials. We tried to make that as rich as possible. We tried to really activate those alleys, make them something you actually want to walk down and not just a back alley anymore. So we did as much of that as we possibly could. And you know, up above two stories, four-story podium, I don't think the public or people walking by or even people from other buildings or Mill Avenue will notice if this is something else or if it's EFS. I think putting something like a brick or something like that would be a little bit overkill on a facade this large on Mill Avenue. We're hearing a lot of people don't want brick. That was a couple comments from our neighborhood meeting. They said, please no brick. So we've tried to make sure we didn't do that. So we do want to keep it as EFS. We are doing an integrated EFS, as Joe had mentioned. It's a very high quality. It also has a very high R value. So for us, it's actually more environmentally friendly. We're trying to incorporate a lot of environmental aspects to this building because of the Weston brand. That's what they like to see. Joe, you didn't mention there's a living wall that's part of the project that's on the inside when you walk in the main entry of this project. We haven't located it yet, but it's a requirement of the Weston brand that we have a living, breathing, centerpiece, focal point in the building. So we're trying to keep the places where people walk and be close to and look at as rich as possible, and make sure those areas are very enjoyable to everyone, the public and the guests and everybody walking in the area. The other thing, too, we tried to do is, I know that City Council and this commission is very concerned about keeping 7th Street connected between Mill Avenue and College. On the Opus project, that was a big push that we had made on that project to make sure that 7th Street was very, very lush and green and matched the House of Tricks across the street, having a lot of landscaping. So we mimicked that landscaping on this site, and we believe that staff will have anyone else on the 7th Street do the same thing. So that was a big deal, and you're seeing it here on the screen. That landscaping and making sure that people have a place to walk and shade and trees and seating areas, and we've even got the coffee shop shown on there as having somewhere in and out kind of feel to it. So there's a lot of little aspects to this that I can't even imagine we can get to tonight, but a lot of details that went into this project. So we do feel that the EFS is appropriate on this building. The colors and materials are all Weston approved. That's another consideration. They have a very significant design booklet. How big is it?
Oh, it's 400 pages.
400-page design booklet that we had to comply with and abide by, and then we ultimately had to get their approvals too on the design. So we feel it's appropriate, it's environmentally friendly, it makes sense, and we feel it's visually appropriate for this area.
Can I ask a question? You keep talking about the Weston brand. Unfortunately, we've seen projects come forward and don't get built, what's to guarantee that this will be a Westin hotel and not a different brand?
Our client has already has a franchise agreement. That franchise agreement is a pretty substantial financial commitment for them to make. We've already submitted conceptual design and schematic designs to Marriott. We've gotten approval on those. So we're very much on the way with and involved with the brand on a day-to-day basis. The franchise agreement actually has a requirement that they will be under construction on January the 5th, 2018, and that there will be an opening of this hotel on June of 2019. So our client has a financial commitment that would be pretty heavy that they would lose if they backed out of that.
There's financial penalties if they don't move forward with this brand.
And my other question is there a full-service restaurant that is open to the public as part of this project?
Yes, part of the program has a 3-meal restaurant, has a lounge, a bar, a coffee shop, and you know, one of the aspects of this project that makes it unique as a hotel in Tempe is that this will be the first truly urban hotel in Tempe. And by urban, I mean you're not coming and parking in a parking lot in front of the hotel and going into the hotel. It's intended that this would be the place if somebody wants to have a meeting, you say, I'll meet you at 4 o'clock and we'll have a drink or a coffee and we'll conduct business at the Westin Hotel. That's
Can you tell me where that space is planned within the building?
I don't have an interior layout, but if you look at this plan, the area that is in the brownish color, if you will house a bar, lounge, restaurant, lounge seating, and entry, what they call their landing zone. Westin has a whole plan for their public space. It's called the Heaven Lobby, and it's broken down into zones, and the idea is that you have a landing zone that you come in, you feel comfortable, you have transitional seating, you have a prospect area where you can conduct business, a quiet area, you have a 3-meal restaurant. So if you see straight below, you'll see one of those spaces is marked kitchen, the larger rectangular space. So the restaurant will be sitting directly adjacent to that kitchen.
Okay, any other questions? Commissioner Brown?
Some of your renderings show that gold business and some show the tan business. I'm being simplified. I'm back to the thin color. I'm kind of obsessing on this. Which is your preference?
You know, our preference, we thought that we could bring some of the coloration of the south side of the building to the front. We're certainly willing to work on a color that would be compatible to all. It wasn't a huge difference between the two. So
I think some of us might prefer the second color.
okay.
The gold is kind of, I don't know, I'm trying to see a tower by someone in New York.
Oh.
Well, we kind of felt that there started to be a little too much of the reddish.
Too much, maybe glitz. Anyway, I just want to touch on that. Now, and if I could mention also our question, the EIFS, you showed a shot of the panels being made,
Yeah.
and they're craned up, and then what kind of sealant is it going to? Is this a sealant that needs to be maintained every 5 or 10 years?
Yes, absolutely. So essentially what you have is a full bay. Our bay is 27 feet center line to center line, so you'd be hoisting a full bay and a full height. And essentially there is a 1/2-inch gasket that goes between the two. So that is the first, when that's lifted in place, that is set down on a gasket. And then there is a caulk joint that comes in, there's backing, and then there's a caulk joint on top of that. Yeah, this has been pretty successfully done on a number of different places. I actually did a project in which we did autoclave panels similarly 15 years ago. I'm not in Austin, Texas, 700-room hotel. I haven't heard any problems.
So the EIFS material has some integral color, correct? It's not just surface?
Yes.
And so does that fade? If they're nice rich red, is that likely to fade in 5 or 10 years?
No. It depends on what EIFS you actually use and the quality of it.
Can you cite the name of the product you're thinking of using?
Couldn't off the top of my head, no. But we would certainly look into that because you're absolutely right. Reddish is a color that over time can have a tendency to fade to a brownish or purple. It's a matter of making the right specifications for it.
So, I mean, let's just say 20 years. Let's say it fades in 20 years. We've seen stucco buildings on Mill Avenue that, of course, they do fade a little bit.
Right.
So it is repaintable, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the other thing is you'll see that there are special paints to be put on top of EIFS that can
And what would the texture be? Like a sand texture?
sand texture. Yeah. Yeah. We would like to see as smooth a surface as possible.
Thank you.
Other questions at this point? Commissioner Summers.
Thank you. Just a clarification. So for the folks who aren't familiar with what EIFS is, it's a material that looks like stucco, right? And what we're talking about here is, I believe most of the EIFS is about 40, 45 feet and up. There's a few places where it's down lower. Can you just?
Our concrete block goes to 45 feet.
Yeah.
So any EIFS would be 45 feet or higher on the tower. Yeah.
Are there areas though where the stucco continues, or EIFS, sorry, continues down
No,
below?
it's primarily a combination of concrete block, and our intention for these columns, these flying buttress columns, if you will, is that would be some form of a metal panel. We didn't want EIFS there.
Right, so 45 feet up, 4-story building.
For the building.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
So the material that you can see up on the screen that borders where the Weston sign is that a metal panel? The red portion that borders.
Yes, we intended those to be metal panels.
Okay, okay. I appreciate that the quality of the EIFS that you're talking about using, and I think it's probably appropriate for the off-white section. I was at the public meeting and saw the same renderings that staff did, and the red portion did seem to be something more upgraded from something that was typical of EIFS from what I could tell from those renderings.
No, we only made a color change. We had never intended to really make a material change. So we were looking at, in both instances, that would be a metal panel. We were just looking, we felt as if, when you look at that rendering, there was just a little too much red going on, and it would be nice to bring another neutral color into the palette.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that you changed from, well, this is still, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit colorblind. This is still red?
Yeah. Could you
Yeah,
explain
yeah.
that a little better, because you just confused me
We
as well.
softened it a bit, to a more salmon kind of color rather than the red.
And what's that material?
It would be metal panel. Yeah, they come out. Should have been.
So that tower on the west side is all metal panel?
The horizontal fins you're talking about?
No, sorry, I'm talking about the tower now.
This-
Previous.
The horizontal pieces are concrete edges that would be some sort of formed metal over top of a concrete edge.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess now I'm talking about the the tower portion, the vertical portion, that is red also, but you're talking about that being ephes.
Right.
And that's what I mentioned during the public meeting. It looked like it was something that was more upgraded than that. It did have
Correct,
reflectivity
yes.
in it.
Yeah. Well, our first intentions and hope was that it was a cementitious panel. We did do some value engineering on the building to bring it in line with where it needed to be.
The other thing, I guess, I didn't hear anybody talking. I wasn't there for the whole time, but I didn't hear anybody say anything bad about brick. But that may have happened while I wasn't there. But and I want to say that I do appreciate all the discussion of how you're bringing the environment in and incorporating that into the building. I did have a question during our early study session about the podium rooftop. And I posed that question again to staff after I had a trip to Chicago, and my hotel room looked out directly onto a bare blank rooftop, which was very unappealing, and it didn't really bring the outdoors into my room. And I looked across the way, and there were green roofs all over the place, and there were improved roofs with swimming pools and other things like that in other buildings. And I know this isn't Chicago, but I think those buildings were quite a bit older too than what we're talking about now. So is there something, and even Commissioner Amorosi, I think, mentioned solar panels potentially, but something for that rooftop on the podium?
Well, let me just say to begin with that we had a set program that we're working with, and a set amount of square feet in terms of function space that we could allocate for exterior use. From day one, the client thought it would be a fabulous idea to have a pole on the roof to have those views out to the north, to see all of Phoenix, and he wanted a bar up there. We focused the majority of that program that has an opportunity to be outside as function space on that roof, as opposed to the lower roof that sits in the south side of the property. We also have a fairly large function space that is on the second floor that that extends itself. Oh, am I lost again? Okay. So if you look at the second floor here, you'll see a 5,000 square foot ballroom and then the pre-function area. And then you'll see this outdoor function space here. That's sort of the hatched area. That's the second area that had the opportunity of being an exterior space. We thought that we would bring that space onto 7th Street to try to make it an active environment along 7th Street. The alternative may have been to pull that back on a roof space on the south side of the building, but we didn't think that that would in any way be as pleasant a space to have functions and also activate 7th Street. So you also have mechanical equipment. So what you're talking about is, I don't have a roof plan, but you're talking about the roof space of what's on top of that ballroom. It would be very hard to load that with planting and materials that would have a heavy load because it is a long span. It's about an 80-foot span on top of that ballroom. And the remaining spaces, we have a lot of mechanical equipment up there, so it kind of restricts what the opportunities might be on that south side. Solar panels, yes. We have talked to a client about the possibility of providing some sort of solar panel that would tie into a loop system and maybe even heat the pool on the top with solar panels.
Okay, thank you. I just think as Tempe, especially downtown, becomes a more vertical city, we need to think more about what our roofs look like, because people are looking down onto them.
Yeah.
Other comments? Commissioner Robati.
I have a quick question, actually two quick questions. If we can go back to that, the view looking east of the west elevation, just so I understand, you said the block goes up to 45 feet. We're looking here. So on that west side, but that is the ephes still going down to what looks like almost the ground, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Just in that small section on the side. What we did is we took that retail piece and we felt as if it would be very important to try to activate the alley. So we carried that retail piece down the alleyway. So there's a small piece of that ephes that would come down there. And then set back from that is the concrete block. Yeah.
Gotcha, okay. And then for staff, is your concern with that more visual or quality of material or both?
It's both. It's also precedent setting. If you look at even the building to the north of this, the Brickyard, and we did not recommend brick, by the way. We told them to tie into the colors along Mill Avenue, which is the brick color, but using a more contemporary material to reflect the Weston standard. So if you look at Mill Avenue, we have the Gateway building, which has a different color, but it is a masonry product. The Brickyard, most of the other buildings along Mill Avenue have a masonry element of some kind, and they tie in with that color theme. It also would be the first tower that would allow ephes this high up, and it is going to be visible from different buildings that are coming in. The projects that we've seen to the east of this, and even within the ASU campus, have used metal panels, stone tiles, porcelain tiles. There's lots of new products out there that give the same panel look, a very contemporary, clean look, without using ephes. And they are using ephes on the south side. It wasn't elimination of all ephes, it was providing additional materials for aesthetic and quality to the building.
Okay, thank you. So then, I don't know how this is going to land with this issue, but I just thought I'd mention that the way the revised condition would read, it would basically come down to interpretation at the time permits are pulled as to what is an alternative that matches the rendering and color pattern. So is that you're comfortable with that being the interpretation at that point?
Yeah, we like the look that you see in this rendering. And I think that can be achieved through a variety of different materials. We didn't want to be dictating materials. We wanted there to be flexibility in having them find an alternative to ephes, and through their research find that and come back to us with that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner
Did you
Minico.
actually, Commissioner Labradie, did you see it's mentioned in that stipulation 15C, the alternative, okay.
I'm going to ask this question of the applicant and then ask staff to weigh in too. You meet on-site parking requirements per code. I think 98 spaces, if I remember, including the 6 on street, meets the 92 or the 94 minimum required. But the reality of operating a 260 to 90 room hotel with meeting space and restaurant space and coffee shop space. Describe for me, it's a Weston brand, so we think we know who the likely user is, but describe to me how you envision 98 spaces working, because that's basically one of every 3 guests can show up with a car to park on site, and that's if no one's in the restaurants, no one's shopping there, nobody's in the ballroom. So how's it work?
How's it work?
Or where do I go when the lot's
Mr.
full?
Chairman, members of the commission, it works. Obviously, there's always a interplay between required parking and what the tenants or the business owners need. If you're familiar with the new CC downtown parking standards, the intent there is to reduce the requirements for each building and then utilize a kind of a across-the-board parking for the downtown, because the intent ultimately is for people to walk more, to use Uber, to use the streetcar, to use light rail, to use alternate forms of transportation, especially from the airport in this case. So there's a lot of reductions in vehicle usage that are allowed here. Even bikes, we've got over 26 or 30 bike spaces here, and people kind of laugh and think, well, people are going to ride bikes, but we've got the bike sharing now, and I think you'd be surprised at how many people will use those. Just jaunting around town, jumping in an Uber and going back to the airport. So we did look at that quite extensively. Obviously, no hotel wants their parking to be under what they require. This meets their requirements for this brand of hotel. Because of what I had mentioned earlier, we're seeing a lot more, as an urban hotel, we're seeing a lot more visitors and guests to the hotel utilizing that alternative transport. There's also the intent of the CC district is that people will use surrounding parking structures and parking on the street, parking in the structures at the Brickyard, parking in West 7th where there's actually the Center Point parking garage is where there's parking there, and all of the other parking garages in the vicinity. So that was the intent of that parking reduction. So we took that, looked at it, made sure we could utilize that as a brand, as a hotel, make sure that worked for us, and it balanced very, very well. So trust me, we took a very long, hard look at that to make sure it would work for us.
Did you really just say, trust me? Wow. All right, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm a Westin client. I'm a member of their frequent stay programs, and I'll stay in them in, the Chicagos and San Franciscos of the world. And I'm a different user when I'm there. Usually, meeting space isn't what I'm going there for. It's not a conference. It's not a, if this was, if this was Mission Palms, for example, in the kind of mix of user you had, I would be much more concerned. And if the city garage wasn't right across the street from it, Mission Palms would be hurting because they've got a lot of meeting space and they get a lot of local kind of staycation kind of visitors. So hopefully there's enough proximity of public garages that works here.
And we also have a very, very limited amount of conference space.
Yeah.
We're limited to the amount based upon the number of rooms. So it's a very, very small area of conference space. But yep, it works.
F.
Commissioner Domenico, what Darren explained is it's basically the concept. When the CC zoning district parking requirements were amended, I think it was in 2015, that was the intent with the TOD station area, looking at the various parking that is available in the vicinity of these projects, so that the commercial is playing off of the street parking and other off-site parking. The code also requires for the applicant to submit a parking, what is it called? The management plan. Thank you. Parking management plan, which shows the various other parking within the vicinity. So that's the idea. As you all know, you heard it yesterday too, there is going to be further discussion with the urban core study with how the parking with TOD and station area happens. So there are potential changes that could happen with the new urban core study too. But the intent is for this urban type development and reducing the parking requirement because there are other things available with the light rail, with the streetcar coming, all of those being anticipated. So that's the
So
intent.
in general, we're comfortable that the proximity to other parking resources for this project are there. Because sometimes it's good to say, well, reduction, on the street or in the mill, downtown area is great, but where those locations are, and also the density of development that's already happened, sometimes is the bigger issue.
Yeah, and when the CC zoning district parking requirements were amended, there was a peer review done on similar situations in other cities. So it's consistent with what urban model for parking is that the CC district was changed to.
Okay, I'll take my bike. Thank you.
And one last thing, if I may, I'd just like to address stipulation 15C, that EFS stipulation that we were talking about. We literally just obviously got the staff report, so we've just been talking about this a little bit, and we really, really do want to stick with the EFS material because it is well above in almost every area in the building, well above the pedestrian realm. And we do feel it makes a cohesive development, it makes a cohesive design on the building. But we would be willing to look at these other alternatives. So instead of, in lieu of EFS, provide alternative building materials. If we could add language in there that would say that we would investigate with staff those alternatives, because a lot of them have different impacts on our project, not only financial impacts, but environmental impacts, visual impacts. This is a big deal. It's a big part of the building that we would have to change, and we'd want to really take a good hard look at that. So we would like to stick with the EFS, but if we could do that, that'd be wonderful. But in the alternative, we would like to at least have the opportunity to keep the EFS and/or just investigate the alternatives.
Commissioner Amorosi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forgive me, I'm not familiar with this EFS. Staff mentioned stucco. You're saying concrete panels, and it looked like the photo was concrete panels. How thick are these concrete panels, and why don't they call them concrete? Because as a stipulation here, it says concrete tile. How is that different from the EFS?
Talking about three entirely different products and three entirely different applications. The tile could be done as a panel with tiles laid up on a panel, and then the panel is then adhered to the building. In that respect, the panel is actually not where the rain comes down, or there's behind it a rain screen. When we had originally talked about concrete panels, these are a similar type application where they are rectangular or whatever form you have of cementitious panels, but they're applied to what is already set as a rain screen. They divide the building up in what looks like a stone, if you will, panel, but they are actually only about 3/4 of an inch thick, and they're adhered to the building on the exterior. EFS, on the other hand, is a product that a lot of people might say it's like stucco, if you will, in the sense that it's cementitious in some ways, but it is a 3-coat application over top of a styrofoam backing board, and essentially that 3-coat application builds up to eventually a finish coat that has a coloration on it. And what we're saying is that if you look around town, you're seeing a lot of properties that might be EFS. Traditionally, the way that that's done is you would actually scaffold the side of the building all the way up, even if it's mid-rise, 15, 16 stories. And there would be guys that actually apply with a trowel those coats of EFS, if you will, on the exterior of the building. The problem with that is you have scaffolding in front of it. You are doing it in different times of the day. You're not quite seeing the imperfections when you're 6 inches away from it. And what we've seen coming out of this plant, and there's others that's called Capture, is that the quality control is much, much better. And they have the opportunity of actually looking at it in daylight and seeing where the imperfections are and finishing it and having quality control before it's shipped out and placed onto the building. So we'd like to explore that. I think it might be an opportunity, as Darren is mentioning, is possibly it's EFS from a certain level up, and we'd look at a material that banded that ground floor as it comes down. So from 45 feet up, it would be EFS. And we
So you said Weston is concerned about the R factor of the EFS. Do you have a number for this type of EFS?
Well, Weston has essentially approved our drawings.
Well, what I'm getting to is that if the porcelain, stone, or concrete tile has a higher R factor, then wouldn't they want to use that, since they say they're concerned with the?
We will meet the energy code requirement in either application. The difference being whether a larger portion of that requirement is met with the exterior material as opposed to building the interior wall. So we will run energy models for the building and essentially meet 2 requirements for the energy code, but it's a matter of how much does the exterior material applied meet that code versus building a larger interior wall with insulation or not. So these materials kind of go back and forth in terms of their R value and what they are. There's also large implications from a cost point of view of what these materials are. It's a wide range.
Thank you.
Other comments? Thank you. We'll open up the public hearing portion of the meeting. I have one individual who has requested to speak, so we'll allow you to come back and address any issues. So Merrill Darcy.
Hello, my name is Merrill Darcy. I live at Brown Street in Tempe. I wasn't able to attend the neighborhood meeting. However, I like this project, and essentially the Weston brand, we all probably are familiar with it, with the La Paloma in Tucson and also the Kierland in Scottsdale. And we should be honored to have Weston even select Tempe and for us to even have something like this in this neighborhood. I think what you're incubating here is a walkable lodging cluster that we do not have a convention center in this town, but we are almost with these hotels that are just popping up, that this is a good start. I mean, this is how you start something with small trade shows, small conventions. And as far as like the aesthetics of this, I think that the architect and also the corporation is probably well in tune to the aesthetics of this, and I think they're probably going to be the best judgment of that. Anyway, this project needs to be approved. Get this done. Thank you.
That's the only card I have. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak on this case?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm the president for the Riverside Neighborhood Association, and in going over a lot of the details to the project, set aside the materials used and the way that it looks, it's nothing has been really addressed about the height of this project and the magnitude that this project actually has. 290 people that are going to be staying here, and 1 out of every 3 people got a place to park their car, and just relying on the parking in the downtown area. I think that is you just can't rely on the downtown area, especially during events such as games and anything that's happening in the downtown area. And I really hope that everybody takes into consideration that this is just a huge project. And with that, I'll end what I have to say. Does anybody have any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on this case? Seeing no one, will close the public hearing portion. I don't know if there's anything you want to respond to on that or not. All right, then we'll open it up for commissioner comments. Anyone? I'll start. I'm not a fan of zero lot line, as everyone knows. I think that's a really tight alley, and to be backed up that far with the small amount of space for the screen wall. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I'm disappointed in the materials and the way this looks. I am afraid that the red is going to fade sooner than later, particularly with it having the west sun on it. So I'm not a fan. So if anyone else has comments, Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I agree with the public speaker that said I think having a Westin in downtown is a positive thing. I think when people come to downtown Tempe, they're aware of vehicle situation and limited parking opportunities in some instances. I don't see a particular issue with this site. I would like to say that I would support the conditions the staff has put into this as is, and I don't think that we should modify the way those were worded. Thank you.
Commissioner Amorosi.
I guess I like the Westin brand. I've stayed at the Westin, and I'm happy that they're coming to Tempe. I also want to echo that I agree with staff because I associate Westin with quality, and I want to see those conditions met. Thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner DiDomenico.
I'm not, the scale of the project does not concern me. I'm ambivalent on the color of the west tower element, vertical element. You know, my experience with EIFS and repair, bird damage, which is pretty significant. We've got a pretty aggressive bird population on Mill Avenue. Those gaps between panels are footholds, and birds make a mess of the standard EIFS application. And then, you know, but again, it's not the curtain wall. It's not going to probably affect, you know, that high cosmetically. Probably wouldn't be a big problem. It's not going to affect its water tightness, but dark colors and bright colors aren't going to last. You know, I'm seeing, you know, 5 years or so, and in the, you know, the color. That's the one thing about, you know, EIFS is the color's impregnated in the pudding that's put up in a traditional application. And it sounded like these panels that would be prefab would have that same condition. So it's not a product that's meant to be painted. It loses some of its characteristics when you put a traditional paint over the top of it. But once it's in place, 18 stories in the air, I don't know what else you do to get your color back. So I don't know how I feel about that. But Andrew, your comment about leaving the condition 15C just the way it is, the way it's written. The way it's written to me means that what they're going to actually put up there is something we'll never get to see again. So by following the way the language is, it says in lieu of EIFS, go investigate and come up with something else that staff will agree to. But us 7 will never see that again until it's 18 stories in the air. So as Ms. Sender suggested, if we approve this project, I'd like to see maybe a language change that says, in addition to EIFS, investigate and consider alternative building materials. But if they're going to change a significant element like that, you know, color or the material, I want to see it come back to us. You know, years ago, I still, whenever I drive past, I think it's called the Vale, the bright pea green, bright green building on University. You know, every time I go past that, I'm like, wow, you know, it didn't seem like a big deal when that got approved, but boy, that color really, you know, it stands out for 15 years. So this could be one of those same things. So I don't know how we deal with sending something that's significant back to staff and just hope that it comes out okay.
Did you have a comment?
Does it, if, once the stipulation is met with any other alternative application, is this something you would like for staff to come back to present it at a study session to just let you know what it is, or how would you prefer that? We can certainly provide an update when this gets worked out, unless you're suggesting some other language. How would you like to proceed?
Well, I guess this is just my individual opinion here, but if we leave it open-ended to go back and come up with a new material and potentially color, hearing what was approved and is about to be built doesn't give us a chance to weigh in. For example, if the decision is, we really want to see this be shiny metal panels, and we want to do it in maroon, and it's going to match the gold, metal things that but something radical like that where it's completely different than what we're looking at now, hearing after the fact wouldn't be helpful.
I'm sorry, the way the condition was written was intended to match the rendering color and pattern. So the intent was that what you're seeing in presentation would be the aesthetic look. It would be the quality of the material applied. Not a change of color.
To match the rendering color, so a specific Pantone or yeah, I know, I'm looking at 3 different, at each of our screens, it's kind of different, I know.
You lean over, it changes.
Yeah.
See, like, if I go over here, yours matches mine.
Yeah, so this salmon, it was described as salmon, but this deeper red brick color. Okay, so staying within that color is what the intent is, and to come up with a different material, but applied in a similar panel kind of fashion. If they stayed within all of that, okay, I follow you now.
Commissioner Brown?
I think the architect's done a good job, and we're probably beating the stucco ethos question a little too hard. I'm comfortable with the ethos and the joint pattern and the technology, and I'm comfortable with the the revised color, which is less gold and more neutral at the fins. So really, I suggest that if I made the motion, I would support stipulations, I think it was 1 and 2, the driveway setback and the demolition sequence, and let the other ones die.
Let the other ones die?
I would not make them part of the I would not include those stipulations in the approval motion. I think perhaps only the first 2 are significant issues.
Meaning you take 15C out in its entirety.
Correct.
And M also, correct?
Correct. I suggest that the architect's done a good job on the color scheme, and that's their responsibility. They've given us their scheme, and I like it. For us to go in and start picking individual colors and to do this negotiation can become very difficult. It could conceivably delay their building permit because they have to have something on their plans. And I think we're
that's
micromanaging.
But that's staff's job to micromanage, so. Commissioner Labadie.
I would agree with the folks who said this is a huge project, and also that I love it. I think it's great. I'm excited that Weston would want to come down here. I have no problem with the parking situation. It meets code. Tempe is downtown Tempe is one of the few places in the valley that you have a lot of options, like real options. There are other places that you can walk around when you're there, but you can't get there, and then you can't get back when you're there. Whereas Tempe, you have real options, and so that's not a concern to me at all. I like the design. I actually prefer the lighter color out in the front, but I'm neither here nor there on that. And I agree that we're beating the ethos question to death. However, I think staff's condition of approval, I think it's clear, and the fact that it says to match the rendering color and pattern is also clear, but I understand the applicant's concern that it leaves it a little bit open-ended, and it might lead to a change that is not workable. And so I'd be listening for a motion initially to see where we land on that, because I want to accommodate the applicant, but I also share staff's concerns a little bit, so that's where
Let
I'm
me
at.
ask the question, if in fact it gets approved with 15C and you can't come to agreement, there is nothing to prevent the applicant from coming back to us, is there? Can they come back at that time and ask us to remove that condition? I mean, it's very nice that you have a timeline. To me, that's not our job, to meet your timeline. Our job is really to come up with what would be the best possible product. And as we discussed, this is something we're going to live with for a long time. And so I think just to get it done because it's expedient to do it now isn't the right attitude to go in. We really want to do this. And if staff has is concerned enough to include this condition, we have other conditions outstanding in terms of the properties on either side. And so I think that there's going to be delayed. It's not like they can start tomorrow anyway. So I'd rather my preference would be that this issue gets resolved at the staff level. And if applicant doesn't like what happened, they can come back to us.
So to answer your question, if it was a major change, we would, if you would like, we can definitely bring it back. Right now, the commission's recommendation will move on to the city council as it stands. So.
And the council has the ability to change it if they so desire. Commissioner Brown, you had a comment?
Just had a comment. I have personal experience with two EFIS buildings. One had a reddish brown that was virtually this dark, and I'm not aware of it fading. But when I see the building, it looks fine. It's a Surprise City Hall. The other one's the building that I work in, which was done in two parts. The second part is 4 or 5 years old, and the EFIS looks as good as the day it was done. It is a good product if it's done well. Any product can be done poorly. I'm much more interested in seeing the brick on the lower building that's ghosted in on this rendering, for example. But in this case, I think it's an appropriate material, and we prefer not to let it be an ongoing task for the architect to deal with the city staff on the options. Some of the other options, such as ceramic tile or metal panels, conceivably, I'm going to guess at this scale, we're talking about $100,000, $150,000 difference. I think that's a lot of tail wagging the dog.
Commissioner Summers.
Thank you. I appreciate the description of this as an urban hotel, Joe, and the citizens' comment about the importance of that. I think this is really the first hotel to plant the flag in this density and this height in this area. And from a height standpoint, my only challenge is it's not taller. And I would guess that the next hotel that comes in after this one goes in and has proven that there's a market is going to be taller. And so I'd fully encourage that. I'm not too concerned about parking. Major cities, you pay $40, $50 a night to park overnight, and so the economics of that will drive it. And my guess is they'll build the full 2 levels below grade. I appreciate the attention to design with the glass on the north edge and with the articulation creatively on the south edge and the overhangs. And I appreciate the honesty and integrity and the fact that you've thought through the design and the fact that you show an operable partition closet in the ballroom, which sometimes we don't get until way too late. So things like that really show through. I think the one thing that hasn't been discussed and isn't discussed in the staff report, as it's probably not usually, is the revenue implications for the city here. If you just run really conservative numbers, we're talking about $800,000 to $1 million a year just in hotel tax revenues, just to the city. Food and beverage is on top of that, state revenues on top of that. And because of that revenue, I can get past the EFIS up high as it is. Like Tom, I've worked in several buildings and been involved in several buildings that use EFIS
not at the ground level, but when it goes further up, and it's a great way to be able to balance the budget needs with the needs to try to focus and have a really attractive building where people see it. And there are some buildings I would challenge folks to look up and tell you what that material is, because sometimes it's so far up you can't tell it's EIFS. Thanks.
And I would just like to say, part of my skepticism is that we have approved 2 other hotels within a half-mile radius of this project, both coming in with the same high expectations and the immediacy, and neither one of those has been built. So I may be a little skeptical because of that. So any other comments or questions? If none, then I'll entertain a motion. Brown.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve PL 170238 with the stipulation for the offset driveway as described in diagrams and the sequence of demolition, building permit, earth, as described by staff.
Just a clarification, because the recommendations do include the changes to 15. Those are part of the recommendations.
I'm sorry, I thought we saw earlier a slide that had 5 lines, and we could say, I recommend line 1 and 2.
The recommendation, the way the 15 is written is the recommendation. So if you want to change that, you need to include that in your motion.
Madam Chair, I suggest and recommend that we approve PL 170238 with stipulations concerning the offset driveway, which I don't see on here,
Correct, that's an addition.
and the sequence of construction.
Number 4 is the demolition permit, and then number 9 under site plan is the eastern drive. And then number 15 under elevations are the materials.
Yes. Although you said number 4, when I turn 4, it's art and private development. I'm on page.
Page 11.
Ah.
For, that's the demolition, and that's the one that they read into the record as being changed.
Yes,
today,
as it was modified.
as was modified.
Let me try this one more time. I suggest we approve PL 170238 with stipulation 4 on page 11 as modified and read into the record, and stipulation 9 concerning the offset driveway, and not including stipulation 15 on page 13. Items 1A through N. That is to say, C and M being stricken. The stipulations A, B, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, and N are understandable.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Brown and seconded by Commissioner Sumner to approve PL 170238 with the changes to read into the record for numbers 4 and 9, and with the deletion of 15C and M. All those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Phil, did you approve? Okay, so that motion passes 4-3 with Commissioner Johnson, Spears, and Labate in the dissent. All right, next item on our agenda is the Commissioner member announcements. Any announcements? If none, staff?
Madam Chair, Commission members, for October 10th, Staff will revise the study session to begin at 5:15 and with the addition of another project, Apache and Oak redevelopment project on the agenda. And we also have the Tempe streetcar project update as well as a Fifth Street streetscape project update that night. For the regular meeting of October 10th, we have a request for a development plan review for Emerald Center for 8,300 square foot approximately at 1746 West Warner Road. And we also have a use permit and development plan review for Caprock Hospital on 1791 West Green Tree Drive. That's all. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're adjourned.